And right outside the beehive, scenes unlike those New Zealanders have ever witnessed before.
These people, the protesters, were peaceful.
Just in the last minute, we've seen a fresh line of police in riot gear head out to try and tackle those protesters.
Police are moving forward in quite a surge line.
Disgraceful day for New Zealand, a black day for New Zealand.
Throughout the protest, Police Commissioner Andrew Coster was under massive pressure, criticised for not having broken up the protest earlier or using force to disperse the crowds. In our memorable interview a fortnight ago, he explained in detail why he wanted police to continue using restraint. On Wednesday, the crowds were cleared without deaths or serious injuries. Despite initial reports, police don't believe any of their officers suffered so much as a broken bone. So, I went back to Police National Headquarters and once again I sat down with Commissioner Andrew Coster. When we spoke 2 weeks ago, I started with a blunt question. Are you too soft? I asked, and I'm going to start with a blunt question again. Are you vindicated?
I didn't take too much pleasure from the way things finished. None of us wanted that kind of ending, but I'm incredibly proud of the way our team deployed. You will not see a more professional, restrained, courageous response to a situation than you saw there this week.
So what changed between the last time we spoke and your decision to go in?
We pursued a path of de-escalation over the previous week, and that allowed us to get in place controls to reduce the number of vehicles and people on the site. And we made real progress with that, and that really allowed us to get to a stage where we could be confident of being successful this week. We worked incredibly hard with a group of protest leaders to try and restore order to the area, and I believe there was at least some genuine intent to achieve that, but what became clear is that they were unable to bring order to the protest. And as that situation became worse, the mix at the protest changed. We saw some of the original crowd leave, and we saw people come in who appeared to be there more for defiance and the fight rather than the original issue.
But what evidence can you give us that the protest was any more violent when you decided to intervene than earlier on?
These are subtle judgments, but when you see families packing up and going, and when you see some of the early groups that arrive saying actually this is unpleasant, it's declining. And we saw tensions occurring within the group that were becoming increasingly tense. We saw an escalation in the poor behaviour towards people in the area, even with a high police presence. This lines up with our experience for other occupations. They do not improve with age. Eventually they decline into disorder, and we could see we needed to act.
Was it a non-violent protest?
I think the impact of the protests on people around was untenable. There was low-level violence towards people in the area. We were getting increasing complaints about the way people were being spoken to and treated as they passed the site. So it was only a matter of time before we had violence, I believe, between groups inside that protest area.
They were remarkable and unnerving scenes for anyone watching the live streams or watching live on television. Was there any point in that intervention where you were concerned that police might lose control?
Sitting there watching it from start to finish in our command centre was very unnerving. You know, the level of violence that we saw when people started lighting fires. You know, there were some moments that were really touch and go within that protest. But what we saw was an incredible teamwork by our people, a very restrained use of tactics, but the application of tactics when they needed to be to achieve the outcome. There was a particular moment where our officers, about 3 lines of them, were being pelted with pavers from the footpath. They had their shields up and they were being driven backwards. And they were being driven backwards into Lambton Quay, which was, you know, city centre full of pedestrians and people finishing up from work. At that moment, our commanders took the decision to use sponge rounds, and that shifted the balance, enabled us to regain control, protect the city centre and ultimately de-escalate the whole situation. So some really good decision making.
What would have happened if they didn't do that?
I could see it playing out. We had these lines of officers being driven back by a crowd that was using extreme violence. You know, every risk of that situation running off into the shops, and who knows what damage could be done.
So you think there was a chance that you could have seen a riot?
Well, there was always a risk with this situation, and we had to plan very carefully. We had to make sure we had enough staff on the ground, and we had to apply those tactics at the right time to stay in control of it.
One thing that was evident to me and interesting watching on the live streams was that the vast majority of your officers who were on the grounds of Parliament didn't have batons. Why was that?
We have determined with this to use the minimum necessary force to effect our purpose. When we started at the beginning of the day, 6 a.m, we had officers without helmets and shields. We began towing cars. We started communicating with everyone on the grounds of Parliament. You know, now is the time to leave. If you want help to leave, we'll help you pack up. We gave every opportunity for people to do so. And then as protester, I suppose, force increased, I saw a protester unleash a fire extinguisher in the face of some officers right at the entrance to Parliament. That led to them using pepper spray. So the tactics were used in a restrained way, and you know, you simply won't see a more restrained resolution of that situation anywhere in the world.
You've used that word so much over the last few days, and I think most people watching those live streams would say the word restraint has been entirely justified. When police were being pelted with bricks, police were facing fires, people were throwing projectiles, driving cars at the front line, police were generally incredibly restrained. That being said, there were a couple of little incidents caught on camera, and I want to present one to you. I know you've seen this footage. It was filmed by a News Hub crew, and it appears to show a confrontation between officers and a man who arrives. He's wearing a red hat. He intervenes in some sort of skirmish between some officers, and it appears from the footage that he may have been punched twice in the head by a police officer, and that he may fall to the ground unconscious. Is that restraint?
I'm not going to pass my judgment on individual instances. All of those will be looked into. You know, where complaints are made, the IPCA will undertake its investigation. Everything I have seen suggests to me that our people were absolutely careful in their response, that they responded to their assessment of the safety of what was going on, and indeed where force was applied to them. I'm very proud of what our people have done.
You feel that way looking at that footage?
I'm incredibly proud of our people, and you know, the wider context around these situations always needs to be considered. You know, I think there was remarkable courage shown when you consider the threat that they faced from that crowd.
That incident where the person drove a vehicle towards police, has that person been arrested?
I'm not going to go into the detail of what we're doing there. I'm aware that the vehicle itself has been recovered, and we will be investigating a lot of the things that occurred, some quite serious offences, the lighting of fires, the stoking of those fires, the throwing of projectiles at police. There's a lot of footage and people can expect to be held accountable.
Yeah, let's talk about the footage a little bit. One of the protest organisers, Chantel Baker, live streamed Wednesday to her 70,000 odd Facebook followers. Have police used that video in their investigation? We will use any footage that we can to understand what occurred and where offences have been committed to prosecute those offences. We also had the helicopter overhead throughout the time, and we could see the way different people were operating, so there's a lot for us to work with. Were the officers who were injured in this event injured by protesters? Certainly in many cases. There were 8 officers injured, thankfully all of them discharged from hospital within 24 hours. Some head injuries from bricks, leg injury from falling into a drain that had been opened up. There were a range of improvised weapons used. We are very thankful that we didn't experience more serious injury than we did. Head injuries from bricks? Yeah, we had some lacerations, one person who was sort of feared concussed. So, and many of those people were treated and then demanded to be back out there with their colleagues supporting them. It was, the commitment was remarkable. Did police have undercover officers in the protest? We have officers collecting intelligence. I wouldn't describe anyone involved as undercover per se. But there were police officers giving information to police from the protest side of the occupation? No, I'm not sure that I could say that occurred, but there were lots of people providing information to police, and we obviously had a lot of officers watching what was happening. The reported acid attack on police, do we know anything more about that? I don't have the detail of that. There were lots of substances thrown on the last day, paint and petrol. Obviously, officers sprayed with water from the hoses. That was earlier on though, wasn't it? There were incidents earlier on, yeah. I just haven't had the result of what came out there. But bottom line is police experienced a lot of abuse through the course of this. Not from everybody, but there was a consistent undercurrent of that from people in that crowd. Police made a significant number of arrests following Wednesday, more than 100 at last count. But what happens now to those protesters when they're bailed? What happens to the protesters who weren't arrested but still feel incredibly angry about the state of affairs? Look, no one wanted the situation to reach the point that it did this week. And I believe we need to think as a nation about what that means for us, how we got there and how we're going to avoid being there in the future. It doesn't do to have sections of our community who are feeling so disconnected from everyone else, and a police response deals with the immediate situation, but it really doesn't address the underlying things that got those people there. And what do you think those things are? Personally? It's not really my place to comment too much on that, but what I would say is we've been through 2 of the most remarkable years that most people could remember. That has seen all sorts of things necessarily in place to keep our communities safe. But when you have those extreme measures in place, people will respond to them in unpredictable ways. And so we need a certain amount of give and take, I think, to recognise the impact that the last 2 years has had on everybody in different ways, and find a way to have unity so that we don't have these scenes playing out in our important places. Do you think having a framework for ending mandates would have been one thing that perhaps would have helped to ease some of the tensions in the protest? Look, that gets into the political domain, and it's beyond my remit. Police has to deal with what's in front of us, but we do care about... You talked about the give and take there. We do care about unity in our communities, because just as police is a thin blue line and we need the consent of most of our community to operate, that's the way our democracy works as well. And if we're not all bought in to the same social contract about how we behave and what we do and don't do, then we've got a problem. And so I think that those are the things we need to be careful about. What are the lessons from this experience for police?
There will be lots, I'm sure, and we will learn those. We will undertake our own operational debrief. No doubt there will be other reviews that occur. I was blown away by the quality of what I saw play out this week. It exceeded even my expectations. However, there are always lessons to learn, and it's important we debrief and take those lessons.
Is there something that stands out to you as perhaps something that, with the benefit of hindsight, police could have done differently?
Look, I'm aware, for example, in Canberra, police were able to intercept the protest when it arrived at Parliament, redirected it, offered them a camping ground and somewhere to stay, said you can come in to the Parliament every day to protest, but you can't stay there. In hindsight, could we have done something like that? Would it have made the difference? We'll never know. Once we had an occupation of the size that we did and the momentum that it had, the only way to deal with it was to gradually de-escalate. We didn't get the peaceful resolution that we hoped for, but at least we were able to get the numbers to a point where police could resolve it.
What form do you think the inquiry or review should take?
That really isn't a matter for me. We will contribute to whatever comes. The Independent Police Conduct Authority is our oversight body. It has a mandate to look into police practice, process and procedure. That would be one mechanism. We have undertaken reviews working with them in the past that have been very effective, so that's one mechanism.
Let's talk about your leadership. 2 weeks ago, when we last spoke, an article was published in the Sunday Star Times in which an unnamed Beehive source criticised your leadership. Do you know who that was?
No, that's the thing about unnamed sources, isn't it?
It's the thing about you being a police officer.
Look, at all times I have done what I've believed to be the right thing to do. The importance of this job is not lost on me, and I do it deeply from within the values that I hold, and I will listen to other perspectives, but ultimately I will take the choices I think are right.
Did you speak with the Prime Minister after Wednesday?
Of course, we've spoken regularly.
What was her feedback?
At that point we were fairly just focused on what had happened and some of the more factual matters, so I'm sure we'll have a fuller debrief in the fullness of time.
Last time we spoke, I asked if you had the confidence of the public, and this was your reply. Ultimately, I will be judged by the history of this. So, how do you think history will judge Wednesday?
I have been overwhelmed by positive, supportive messages from the public about our approach to the situation throughout and the resolution on Wednesday. My inbox is normally a pretty good gauge about how people are feeling. They don't hesitate to write when they're unhappy. My sense is that people are hugely grateful for the way this was managed, and I'm confident that we did the best that we could.
Police Commissioner Andrew Coster. Just one final note. After our interview, we obtained more footage of that incident where a man appeared to be hit in the head by an officer collapsing on the ground. From this angle, the man clearly lunges at police to try and intervene with an arrest. Whether or not he was actually knocked unconscious still isn't clear. There's a delay between the skirmish and his falling. The Police Commissioner says he stands by his officer's actions.